The inherent nature of secrecy within the United States government is an undeniable reality. Our government has a significant history of keeping information hidden. The stated purpose is often to protect the public and national interests. However, many government operations are designed never to see the light of public scrutiny. And for those who serve in the military, closer proximity to such classified information is unavoidable. The story Night Watch at Fort Campbell presents a choice, an invitation into a peculiar dimension through a metaphorical mist. This dimension holds narratives that defy all known explanation in reality. It is a space that exists suspended between reality and imagination, between truth and fiction. We, the listeners, must discern for ourselves the truth amidst the layers of potential deception and skepticism. This process of discernment is akin to navigating through the fog of war. My 23 months stationed at Fort Campbell were an incredibly interesting period in my military career. My primary military occupational specialty, MOS, was in communications, but a temporary duty assignment. TDY moved me to the military police MP section. My role within the MP unit was as a gate security and patrol officer. I genuinely preferred the security patrols day and night on the quiet back roads and more remote areas over the desk work and communications. It was these patrols that led me to strange encounters. One particular encounter was not considered too unusual by me at the time, but in retrospect, perhaps it held more significance. We must acknowledge that government secrets do exist, and often for the purpose of protecting the American people and our allies. A significant historical example involves the concealment of an entire American city for many years. The city in question is Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Oak Ridge is only a few hours' drive east of Fort Campbell. Another example of a historical secret U.S. government facility is Area 51, also known as Groom Lake in Nevada. Famous for the development and testing of advanced aircraft whose existence was officially denied for decades. Oak Ridge holds an extraordinary history. The U.S. government built this entire city in just a few months during the 1940s. It was deliberately hidden within approximately 60,000 acres of isolated, undeveloped land in Tennessee. The entire city infrastructure, including roads, traffic lights, and sewage systems, was planned and constructed by the government. The city was built to house a specific population, tens of thousands of civilian employees and their families who were secretly relocated there. The sole objective was to gather and prepare materials for the development of a new type of weapon, the atomic bomb. This operation took place in 1942. The atomic bomb was seen as a new weapon capable of ending the war, albeit at a tragic cost. Oak Ridge was a critical part of the top-secret Manhattan Project during World War II. The very existence of the city itself was kept completely hidden from the outside world. It did not appear on any maps until the war ended. The challenges and consequences of maintaining large-scale government secrets are not to be taken lightly. Concealing something as massive as an entire city like Oak Ridge was inherently incredibly difficult. Imagine a hypothetical scenario. A civilian accidentally discovers such a secret. It would be difficult for an ordinary citizen to remain silent about such a monumental discovery. The risk of widespread exposure is significant if a critical secret is unveiled. The potential consequences if Oak Ridge's existence was revealed at that time could have been sabotage to the Manhattan Project, directly affecting the outcome of World War II. The government surely had to take extensive measures, perhaps far beyond what we can imagine, to prevent this discovery. Personally, I wouldn't want to be that unlucky civilian in that hypothetical scenario. History also records similar denials and concealments regarding other sensitive government locations, such as the long-denied existence of Area 51, Groom Lake, associated with advanced military aviation programs. There is a distinct difference in how classified information is handled between military personnel and civilians. Military personnel, upon encountering classified information, understand the potential damage to national security and their own careers if they disclose it. This understanding leads military personnel to be more inclined to maintain secrecy than civilians. Military personnel are bound by the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, which includes specific articles addressing unauthorized disclosure of classified information with severe penalties. I believe that Corporal Lack and I stumbled upon something we weren't supposed to see while stationed at Fort Campbell. Corporal Lack was my partner during those shifts. Fort Campbell is a large U.S. Army base known for housing elite units such as the 101st Airborne Division and the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, SOAR, units often associated with sensitive or classified operations. Overall, Lack was a good soldier. He was professional, approachable, and had a good sense of humor at the right times. He was generally well liked. However, Lack had one peculiar habit. Sometimes he would be unnecessarily overly serious. It was this habit that pushed Lack and me into a dangerous situation one night in February 1988. That situation nearly cost both of us our lives. The bond and trust among military personnel, especially those on patrol together, are vital for survival and effective action in unexpected or dangerous situations. The incident occurred on a cold February night in 1988 during a routine patrol shift. A sudden radio call came in. Dispatch relayed information from the Clarksville Police Department. Clarksville Police had received a 911 call regarding a possible small civilian aircraft crash. The caller reported seeing an aircraft flying very low over the southern fence line of the base. The caller believed the aircraft had crashed inside the base perimeter. Civilian police do not have jurisdiction to investigate on military base land. Therefore, the Clarksville Police Department contacted Base Police Dispatch. Lack and I were assigned to search that area due to our patrol location at the time. Initially, we were a bit skeptical about this report. Aircraft don't crash that often. Interaction procedures between civilian law enforcement and military bases regarding incidents near borders typically involve strict protocols for transferring jurisdiction and coordination, especially if the incident crosses property lines. We drove around the designated area, honestly not expecting to find anything. The search area was less densely wooded with open fields along the roads. We drove slowly in the dark, using the truck's headlights to sweep along the tree line. Suddenly we saw what appeared to be a crash site in an open field. Searching for aircraft crash sites, especially small aircraft in varied terrain, and darkness presents significant challenges, often requiring systematic search patterns and specialized equipment beyond standard patrol gear. We got out of the truck, flashlights in hand, and moved quickly but cautiously toward the wreckage. The flashlight beams swept across the surrounding area. We had to navigate through countless pieces of debris and twisted metal fragments. Approaching any potential accident site, especially military or unidentified aircraft, carries inherent risks including unexploded ordnance, hazardous materials, fuel chemicals requiring utmost caution. Perhaps reporting to dispatch immediately upon finding the crash site would have been wiser. The reason we didn't report immediately was curiosity and the desire to confirm the discovery before notifying. Additionally, we needed to check if there were any survivors who needed help. Standard military reporting procedures for significant observations or incidents such as finding a downed aircraft often follow structured formats like salute reports, size activity location unit, time equipment to ensure all critical initial information is conveyed efficiently to dispatch. An initial assessment of the crash scene revealed many anomalies. The wreckage was emitting visible water vapor in the cold night air. The main section of the aircraft was located about 75 yards from the road and tree line right in the middle of the open field. As we got closer, we immediately realized this was not a typical civilian aircraft. Initial identification indicated this was the wreckage of an Apache attack helicopter. Strangely, there was no smell of spilled fuel or any sign of a fire. Although the scene looked grim, we continued to approach to check for survivors. The AH-64 Apache is a twin turboshaft attack helicopter with a crew of 2 pilot and co-pilot gunner, known for its formidable combat capabilities. The detailed description of the impact and debris field suggests a horrific level of destruction. The ground had a significant crater at the initial impact point. Many pieces of the helicopter were buried within that crater. A trail of impact points and debris extended across the ground in front of the crater. Unexploded rockets detached from their racks were scattered throughout the open field, a potential hazard. Smaller craters indicated the helicopter might have bounced, flipped, or rolled multiple times after the initial impact. Its final state was a deformed pile of shattered and twisted metal. As we swept our flashlights toward the tree line, we noticed clear damage to the tops of the trees. The hypothesis formed: the helicopter had clipped the treetops at high speed, causing a sudden and violent crash, giving the pilot almost no time to react. The Apache was severely damaged, including the cockpit. Based on the extent of the damage, the likelihood of either pilot surviving was very low, if not zero. I still ordered LAC to check the cockpit, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. Meanwhile, I decided to run back to the truck to report via radio, moving carefully to avoid debris on the way back to the vehicle. The situation became stranger when I tried to contact dispatch. I attempted to call on the radio Bravo 47 to command. "Read you loud and clear, over." Dispatch responded, "Command reads you loud and clear." "Bravo, go ahead." As soon as I began transmitting, my voice was suddenly drowned out by interference. It was a very distinct electronic hum, unlike normal static. Attempting to switch to other radio channels also encountered similar interference, preventing any transmission attempts. This type of interference did not align with typical atmospheric or terrain-induced radio signal degradation we normally experienced on base. Analysis of the radio interference, based on my communications expertise, indicated something unusual. My military occupational specialty, MOE, was communications, strongly suggesting this interference was not random. I had never heard this specific type of interference before. There were no power lines or other obvious sources of interference in this open field at Fort Campbell. The specific frequency and characteristics of radio interference can sometimes indicate its source, such as jamming equipment or powerful unconventional energy emissions. The inability to send a report to dispatch confirmed my suspicion. The assigned radio frequencies appeared to be deliberately jammed. This jamming affected all available channels, which was extremely unusual. It was characterized by a distinct electronic hum, an alien and ominous sound. With my communications expertise, I had a strong suspicion this was not accidental or natural interference. In a surge of frustration and anxiety, I slammed the radio handset down onto the truck seat. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the back of the truck before heading back toward the crash site. LAC was standing by the airframe, intently observing the pilot. The pilot was still trapped in the rear seat, visible through the remains of the shattered cockpit canopy. The first thing that struck me was that the pilot was not wearing the standard US olive drab, one-piece flight suit. Instead, he was wearing an old-style OD green field uniform with large buttons reminiscent of Vietnam-era uniforms. A foreign flag patch was clearly visible on the pilot's upper sleeve. Based on previous deployment experience, I recognized it as a Honduran military uniform. The presence of a Honduran uniform on a pilot flying a US Apache attack helicopter was an extreme anomaly, a chilling absurdity. However, the pilot was wearing a proper flight helmet equipped with integrated night vision goggles and modern target acquisition hardware. There was no doubt the pilot was dead. The possibility of the pilot or gunner surviving was considered impossible given the severity of the crash. The nose section of the helicopter was almost completely obliterated on impact. The front section where the gunner would have been seated was simply gone, leaving only a twisted mess of metal. The helicopter originally carried 2 people, but the level of destruction made it difficult to even discern that anymore. I informed LAC about the radio interference issue. We were both confused and felt a growing unease about this strange situation. We continued to carefully circle the wreckage, looking for anything else unusual that might explain things. We discussed the best course of action given the inability to contact command. The plan was made. One person should stay near the wreckage with the fire extinguisher to potentially put out a fire if one erupted, and preserve the scene for investigators. Suddenly, the sound of approaching vehicle engines reached us from the direction of the road. Headlights swept through the darkness, growing brighter. 2 Humvees and an M35 troop transport truck sped up and stopped abruptly at the edge of the open field. About a dozen soldiers wearing unusual black uniforms quickly jumped out of the M35 truck deuce. These soldiers rapidly approached the wreckage, their eyes constantly sweeping the area, including me and LAC. Their M16 rifles were all raised and in a ready-to-fire position. This behavior, weapons ready pointed at fellow soldiers, was considered highly unusual and alarming for a standard crash scene investigation. These soldiers lacked standard military identification, no unit patches and no name tapes on their uniforms. They only wore a subdued US flag patch on their sleeves. Rank insignia was also minimal, only the stripes of a sergeant or corporal, and the rest had no rank at all. The use of unmarked vehicles, lack of standard identification coupled with unusual uniforms and behavior are characteristic of highly clandestine operational units, or units performing special missions operating outside standard protocols to ensure secrecy and plausible deniability. Higher-ranking officers, a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, and 2 majors, emerged from the Humvees. 4 soldiers from the larger group detached and joined the officers. These black uniforms, the absence of standard identification, and their unusual behavior all pointed to a non-standard military unit, likely a clandestine unit operating outside the framework of normal protocols, perhaps involved in projects that were not meant for public knowledge or worse. The colonel pointed directly at me and lacked his voice dry and authoritative. Ordering us to leave immediately, Lack, with the reflex of a regulation-abiding soldier, responded formally and correctly, refusing to leave the scene until properly relieved according to military regulations. The colonel reacted with visible displeasure and anger, his eyes as cold as ice. Deep down, I knew that regulations required obeying a superior officer, and I was completely baffled by Lack's rigid stance in this clearly dangerous situation. The colonel turned to a nearby sergeant, his voice turning deadly. "If they aren't gone in 30 seconds, shoot that corporal." He continued without emotion, "And dispose of both their bodies with this scrap metal." The sergeant without hesitation raised his M16. Its dark muzzle pointed directly at Lack's chest. I recognized the extreme danger and undeniable existential threat. This was the moment to fold. I quickly turned and walked toward our truck without saying a word, my heart pounding in my chest. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, kept my foot on the brake, and put it in gear. "Ready?" I waited, looking straight ahead through the windshield, hoping Lack would follow in time. A moment later, Lack opened the passenger door and got in, clearly having changed his mind after looking down that barrel. I hit the gas immediately, getting the truck out of there as fast as possible, darkness and silence enveloping us. After an indeterminate amount of time, when we were a good distance away, the electronic hum jamming the radio suddenly stopped. The radio suddenly came back to life, and the voice of dispatch calling out startled me. "Bravo. 47, what's your status, over?" I tried to keep my voice calm, responding, "We're okay, Command. We got part of your transmission before losing contact." "What were you reporting, over?" The dispatcher's voice came through, curious. I hesitated for a second, then gave a false report, a necessary lie to survive. "We haven't found anything yet. Command will continue searching the area." A few hours later, at the end of our shift, the shift commander called Lack and me into his office. The commander's demeanor seemed hesitant, probing unlike his usual self. He asked if we had found anything during the search in that wooded area. Based on hard-earned past experience, I understood that sometimes silence is the best, safest option in sensitive situations like this. I cleared my throat, glanced at Lack, then looked directly at the commander. "We didn't see anything unusual out there, sir." Lack seemed about to say something. His face tense, but then he just nodded and confirmed my statement, burying the horrific secret of that night deep down. Silence enveloped the shift commander's office after my nothing unusual report. The relief that flickered across his face wasn't just simple satisfaction. It was like the release of someone who knew more than was being said, someone who had just avoided an unwanted hassle. We were dismissed, and a temporary sense of relief, though, mixed with unease, washed over me. I drove straight home, skipping dinner, just sitting alone in my dark apartment, trying to piece together the chaotic fragments of the terrifying night that had just passed. My mind wrestled with the illogical events, the haunting images of the wreckage, the cold. Colonel and the M16 barrel pointed directly at Lack. Why did things like this keep happening in my life? Unable to find immediate answers, I drifted into an exhausted sleep, but my mind continued to race. There was no official information or report released afterward about a civilian aircraft crash. I made a conscious decision never to ask anyone about the incident, burying it as a deeply unsettling personal secret. Years passed and I always wondered if the colonel's death threat was real or just a cruel psychological tactic. Later, after I had a family, other worries arose. What was the ultimate fate of the bodies of those 2 pilots in that Apache? Where are they resting? Will their families ever know the truth about their children's deaths? Or did their remains vanish forever into the shadowy world of top-secret government secrets, becoming anonymous numbers in a sealed file? The long-term psychological burden on military personnel who witness traumatic or highly classified events is a harsh reality, often leading to persistent anguish and ethical questions about the human cost of secrecy. Regarding the Honduran pilot found in the cockpit, I have a potential explanation, although it doesn't diminish the strangeness of the entire incident. I later learned about the U.S. military's clandestine use of Apache helicopters to train foreign pilots to fly U.S. military aircraft. This training was conducted for a specific strategic reason, hidden behind a veil of military secrecy. U.S. military aid and training programs for foreign allies during the Cold War often included providing access to advanced weaponry and tactics, sometimes under clandestine agreements aimed at building capacity for proxy forces. The broader geopolitical context was U.S. foreign policy in the 1980s focused on preventing the spread of communism. This policy was actively applied in Central America. Following the overthrow of the Nicaraguan government in 1979, the United States supported anti-communist forces known as the Contras. The Contras engaged in conflict against the newly established Marxist Sandinista government, which was reportedly funded by the Soviet Union. The Iran-Contra affair, a major political scandal involving the illegal sale of weapons to Iran to fund the Contras, is a prime example of the controversial and clandestine nature of U.S. support for these groups during that period. Operation Golden Pheasant began on March 17, 1988, about a month after we discovered the crashed Apache. The operation involved the deployment of thousands of U.S. military personnel to Honduras, including units from the 82nd Airborne Division. Prior to that, I had been deployed to Honduras in December 1986, over a year earlier, to support airfield construction, potentially in preparation for future air operations. Like Golden Pheasant operation, Golden Pheasant was officially described as an emergency deployment readiness exercise and a joint exercise with the Honduran military. Despite that official label, it was clear that U.S. soldiers were deployed in a combat-ready posture. Rumors circulated that the deployment was a response to illegal activities by Sandinista forces inside Honduran territory. Pentagon officials publicly reassured the public that U.S. troops would maintain distance from the border area, where the Contras and Sandinistas were reportedly clashing. The rapid deployment of U.S. forces in March led to a swift withdrawal by the Sandinistas. U.S. troops were subsequently withdrawn from Honduras by the end of March 1988. Honduras served as a significant logistical hub and training ground for U.S. military operations and support for proxy forces in Central America throughout the 1980s, often facilitating operations related to the conflict in neighboring Nicaragua. The U.S. government's policy of supporting and funding the Contras faced significant opposition from many Americans. Congressional actions such as the passage of the Boland Amendment were taken in the 1980s to restrict or prohibit U.S. aid to the Contras, reflecting domestic disagreement and legislative attempts to control the executive branch's covert activities. The Iran-Contra affair is a prime example of clandestine arms sales bypassing congressional oversight. This covert action caused significant political controversy in the late 1980s, shaking the foundations of U.S. politics. The Iran-Contra investigation led to the indictment and conviction of several high-ranking officials, although some convictions were later overturned further, highlighting the legal and political complexities surrounding covert operations. However, uncertainty remains regarding the extent to which the Iran-Contra context can explain the crashed helicopter, the Honduran pilot, the strange soldiers in black, and the attitude of the shift commander that night. I must admit that not all the strange stories I have witnessed have been told. The remaining stories include an event from my time in Honduras in late 1986. But the next story I want to share is the strangest and most disturbing event I ever witnessed during my time stationed at Fort Campbell, I considered adding brief personal anecdotes or dedications during this narration. And I want to dedicate this section to the memory of a good friend named Jimmy, who was also an Apache helicopter pilot. Jimmy's Apache crashed tragically at Fort Campbell itself in 2018. Jimmy was a cheerful, life-loving person. I never saw him truly angry even when facing the stress of being a recon Marine. Maybe he was annoyed, but never loud. Given that the topic of Apache crashes has come up, I've decided to share a specific story about Jimmy in this episode, where my recon team and I nearly died at the same time in the Philippines. The context was a deployment in early 2015 with the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. 31st MEU forward deployed from Okinawa, Japan, serving as the U.S.'s only continuously forward deployed MEU. We traveled by ship specifically on the USS Payload. The main destination was the Philippines around early 2015, with the primary purpose of conducting interoperability training exercises. This training was intended to build good relationships and establish links between the two countries' militaries for potential future allied operations. Jimmy's friendly nature and networking skills facilitated this cooperation. Jimmy arranged for my team to link up with the MEU's Anglico Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company unit. Anglico units are specialized teams that coordinate fires air naval artillery for Allied or coalition forces, serving as a crucial link between ground units and supporting arms. The training involved working alongside Anglico and the Philippine Marines. The training period lasted about a week. It was described primarily as blowing things up, an experience that was apparently professionally very enjoyable. Activities included setting up an observation post overlooking a valley calling in, and coordinating fire from aircraft and artillery targeting various objects, including old vehicles placed within the valley's target range. I believe that week of training solidified Jimmy's desire to become an Apache pilot. He absolutely loved calling in air support and directly observing the destructive effectiveness of the Apaches on the simulated battlefield. The design of the AHS-HT-4 Apache specifically prioritizes anti-tank and close air support roles, making their live fire demonstrations particularly impressive for ground troops like us. Witnessing the Apaches turn the targets in the valley into smoking piles of scrap metal was a significant and exhilarating experience for him, a deadly allure of war technology. However, leaving the observation post after the exercise concluded proved unexpectedly difficult. One of our trucks got stuck in the thick, muddy ground after the rain. Then not just one, but multiple trucks got stuck in succession, turning the area into an impromptu mud pit. There's a humorous anecdote about Jimmy casually sunbathing while others struggled to free the vehicles. A bizarre moment of relaxation amidst collective effort. Military vehicle recovery in difficult terrain, especially mud, is a common logistical obstacle requiring coordinated effort, and sometimes specialized equipment or techniques like bridging mats or winches. The Humvee assigned to pick us up arrived late after dark had fully set in and the rain was still falling heavily. Our backpacks were strapped to the sides of the vehicle, an odd arrangement. The tarp covering the back of the vehicle had been removed to make it easier to strap the backpacks to the sides. Then the tarp was pulled back over the backpacks on the sides to shield them from the rain, creating a completely enclosed, stuffy space in the back. Standard military loading procedures for transporting personnel prioritize clear entry and exit and secure seating areas, suggesting that the configuration with backpacks on the sides and the tarp covering them was non-standard and presented a potentially serious safety hazard. Our entire team climbed into the back of the truck for the ride back to the FOB forward operating base, which was several kilometers away. The ride was initially merely miserable, bumpy, wet, and dark. But it quickly became much worse as a strong smell of diesel fumes began to fill the back of the truck. Previous military experience taught me that smelling diesel fumes was common in military vehicles or aircraft. But this time, the intensity was unusually alarming. Exposure to diesel exhaust, which contains particulate matter and toxic gases like carbon monoxide, is a recognized occupational hazard for military personnel operating vehicles, especially in enclosed or semi-enclosed spaces. The foul odor worsened over time, clinging to the stagnant air. The fumes caused members of the team to cover their faces, gag and cough uncontrollably in the damp darkness, and Some were so desperate they tried to stick their heads out from under the tarp on the sides to get a breath of fresh air, even if only for a moment. I was sitting closest to the front, trying to lean forward to talk to the driver through the small gap. I asked the driver if he smelled the fumes and requested him to open the windows or vents for ventilation. The driver and those in the front seemed unaffected by the stench, making me wonder if my team was being overly sensitive or if something worse was happening. The fumes continued to thicken despite attempts at ventilation from the front, the air becoming increasingly dense and difficult to breathe. I yelled towards the back where Jimmy was sitting closest to the exhaust. I asked Jimmy if he could check for a leak or problem with the exhaust. Jimmy replied that he couldn't check because he was sitting on top of gear trapped between the backpacks and it was completely dark in the back of the truck. The integrity of the exhaust system is critical to preventing carbon monoxide poisoning, a potentially fatal hazard in military vehicles if leaks occur, and ventilation is insufficient, especially during prolonged transport and in confined spaces. The lack of light further hindered the ability to inspect the vehicle's condition in the dark, leaving us completely helpless against the invisible danger that was enveloping us. Our entire team was severely affected by the diesel fumes accumulating in the enclosed truck bed. Everyone was miserable, exhausted, and the only thing they craved at that moment was fresh air, even just a short breath. Military culture often discourages requesting a stop just because of discomfort. The general expectation is to suck it up to show toughness. But this situation went far beyond normal discomfort. It was an existential threat. The risk of carbon monoxide poisoning from vehicle exhaust, a colorless, odorless gas, makes the smell of diesel fumes a warning sign of deadly danger. Not just a mere unpleasant odor, a fact that many soldiers might not fully grasp in the heat of the moment. As the team leader and highest-ranking person, I felt compelled to act when others hesitated. Held back by that cultural pressure, I ordered the driver to stop the vehicle, immediately explaining that the fumes were too heavy and the team was being poisoned. The vehicle stopped, and our entire team practically tumbled out in desperation. We immediately gulped down the fresh air, each deep breath as if trying to expel the poison that was invading our bodies. The cold feeling of the rain hitting our faces became surprisingly pleasant after escaping that toxic atmosphere. The immediate physiological relief upon escaping a toxic environment and breathing fresh air is a clear indicator of the severity of the prior exposure. After recovering slightly, I went to check the exhaust area in the back where Jimmy had been sitting. The cause of the dangerous fume buildup was quickly identified. Someone had strapped gear to the sides of the truck. The tarp was then pulled over the pile of gear and inadvertently covered the Humvee's very high exhaust pipe as well. This high exhaust pipe was specifically designed to give the vehicle deep wading capability. The snorkel-like high exhaust is standard on many military vehicles like the Humvee, precisely to facilitate deep water crossings, highlighting how their design purpose was inadvertently turned into a hazard here by the improper placement of the tarp. The tarp covering the exhaust pipe and the enclosed truck bed created a literal gas chamber. The exhaust fumes were trapped inside the tarp and the truck bed with no escape other than to accumulate and poison those inside. The team decided to forgo protecting the gear from the rain and move the tarp. The tarp was pulled off the exhaust pipe, exposing it to the rain. This resulted in the gear getting wet, but more importantly, it prevented further buildup of toxic fumes. I determined that carbon monoxide was most likely the main issue, the invisible but deadly danger. The critical importance of ventilation in military vehicles, especially older models or those operating in confined spaces, is paramount to preventing the buildup of exhaust fumes or other hazardous contaminants like carbon monoxide. Our entire team nearly died from carbon monoxide poisoning that night. This near-fatal incident occurred partly because no one wanted to be the first to complain or appear weak, a dangerous consequence of military culture that sometimes prioritizes toughness over even life safety. The psychological pressure of military cohesion and the need to appear tough can sometimes override individual concerns, even regarding immediate safety risks, leading to unnecessarily dangerous situations. I ended the story with a wry, ironic smile. Good times in the Philippines. Thank you for listening to this short story. Please remember to subscribe to the channel to keep following. Part 3 of the main story will continue soon.
In 1942, as the fires of war blazed across the Pacific Theater, another darkness, older than modern guns, began to stir from the depths of the Solomon Islands. Japanese forces, ambitious to swallow the strategic territory northeast of Australia, rooted themselves in these islands like a ravenous beast, unaware they were stepping into the domain of something far more dreadful. The Allied forces, led by the US Navy, plunged in like a sharp blade, aiming straight for Guadalcanal, an island even the sunlight seemed hesitant to touch her. In the suffocating heat of the rainforest, Japanese soldiers sweated digging trenches and building an air base, but their eyes constantly darted towards the dense canopy, where the wind howled like the whispers of death. "Careful, Tanaka. I just heard something. That wasn't the wind." "You're imagining things. Don't scare me," Tanaka snapped, but his hand gripping his rifle trembled. They didn't know, or chose to ignore, that an ancient entity had lived on this island since before recorded history, something the native Solomon Islanders only dared mention in trembling prayers. The islanders, their eyes haunted, had tried to warn, "Don't go deep into the jungle. The giants will not forgive strangers." But the Japanese soldiers just scoffed, dismissing it as the superstition of the weakie. Then came the fateful day when US Marines landed on Guadalcanal's shores like a wave of steel, pushing the Japanese further inland, where the darkness waited to devour both victor and vanquished. It wasn't the sound of guns or bombs that froze the hearts of the Japanese soldiers, but the heavy footsteps echoing in the night, as if the entire island was breathing, living, hunting. "Did you hear that, Sato?" It's right behind me. Run! Don't look back!" But when Sato turned, there was only darkness and a roar that shook the heavens. Rumors spread like wildfire through the ranks of the retreating Japanese troops. Something enormous, taller than the ancient trees, with eyes burning red like blood, was stalking them in the deep jungle. I've read classified reports from that time. A Japanese sergeant wrote in his diary that he saw comrades torn apart like dolls by a hand, larger than his entire body. No one knew exactly what it was, Skinwalker, demon, or the giants of Solomon legend. But all that remained of the Japanese soldiers were tattered boots and screams swallowed by the darkness. The natives whispered that this island was cursed, that these creatures not only protected the land, but punished any trespassers with horror beyond imagination. As the Allied forces pushed deeper, they too began to feel uneasy. Fleeting shadows in the mist, unexplainable noises, and the sense of being watched by an unseen predator. "Captain, I swear I saw something, at least 16 feet tall." "Don't panic, Private. Focus on the Japanese." But the captain's voice also faltered with doubter. This wasn't just a war between men, but a confrontation with something beyond understanding, where bullets became meaningless against the teeth and claws of the darkness. Guadalcanal wasn't just a battlefield of World War II. It was a place where reality ripped open, revealing nightmares humanity wasn't ready to face. Before 1941, the people of the Solomons lived peacefully, knowing war only through distant rumors from Europe or Asia, thousands of miles across the deep blue ocean. But after Pearl Harbor, the shadow of war fell over the islands, and with it came the awakening of entities that had slumbered for centuries, now roused by the scent of blood and the roar of bombs. Britain hastily withdrew its personnel, leaving panicked native workers to flee back to their villages or hide in the jungle, where they knew safety was merely an illusion against the ancient predators. If you've ever set foot on Guadalcanal, you'd understand why they call it the fog of war. Not just because of the smoke and fire, but because of what hides in the mist, waiting to pull you into eternal darkness. In May 1942, the Empire of Japan, aiming to build a steel wall against the Allies, turned the Solomon Islands into its southernmost outpost, unaware they were awakening something more terrifying than war itself. Japanese troops quickly occupied the main islands, transforming Guadalcanal into a living fortress with airstrips, seaplane bases, and defensive fortifications sprouting like bleeding wounds on the pristine island's skinwalkers. Their presence was like a cold blade pressed against the communication lines between Australia and the United States, making the Australian continent tremble at the prospect of being swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The United States, with the sharp eyes of strategists, could not stand idly by. They planned a counter-offensive, deciding to make Guadalcanal the first battleground, where the fate of the Pacific would be decided. On August 7, 1942, the 1st Marine Division landed, initiating a bloody nightmare that no one, not even seasoned veterans, could have foreseen. When the Japanese first set foot on the island, they walked in an eerie silence. No gunfire, no resistance from the peaceful Solomon Islanders. Only the wind whistling through the old-growth forest like a warning from the dead. "Watch out! Something's not right here," a Japanese soldier whispered to his comrade, but their commander roared, "Silence! This is our land now." That quiet was just a fragile veneer, concealing a terrifying storm about to break. From both humans and entities not of this world. Under the brutal heel of the Japanese military, the Solomon Islanders and thousands of forced Korean laborers brought here endured a living hell, their cries for help swallowed by the deep jungle and endless darkness. I once read a classified report. A Korean laborer recounted seeing his friend vanish in the night, leaving only blood-soaked shoes and a roar unlike any known animal. Hatred ignited in the hearts of the islanders, turning them from indifferent observers into vengeful phantoms, silently sabotaging the Japanese and aiding the Americans with iron resolve. "They aren't human. They are demons from the sea," an old village elder hissed in the shadows, his eyes reflecting light from another world. Few knew that before the war erupted, the Royal Australian Navy had sown seeds of resistance with the Coast Watchers intelligence network. Observers who carried no guns but held the hearts of warriors. They weren't professional spies, but courageous civilians, officials, plantation owners, missionaries, people who knew the island like the back of their hand and loved it more than their own lives. The Japanese, upon discovering these eyes and ears, hunted them relentlessly. But each pursuit was like punching at shadows. The Coast Watchers vanished like ghosts into the dense jungle. "We're being watched. I can feel it." A Japanese officer yelled, but only the rustling leaves and the bone-chilling cold of an unseen predator answered him. Hiding in the oppressive heat and humidity, they observed every Japanese movement, sending radio messages worth their weight in gold. "Eagle calling Condor. Lunga Point Airfield near completion. 2 engineer battalions." I believe it was a Coast Watcher who saw something no one dared speak of. A colossal shadow gliding through the mist, taller than the ancient trees as he was transmitting. Information from that brave observer reached the Australians, then the Americans, making Guadalcanal the primary target, not just for strategic reasons, but also due to a vague premonition of something waiting in the darkness. With support from the Coast Watchers and the Australian Navy, US forces tore through Japan's coastal defenses like a sharp blade. But behind the initial victory lay the island's sigh, an ignored warning. Guadalcanal wasn't just a place where humans fought. I've found redacted records mentioning Japanese soldiers disappearing without a trace, and screams that gunfire couldn't drown out. Perhaps in the deep jungle, it wasn't just the Coast Watchers stalking the Japanese, but also ancient entities, giants, demons, or something nameless, waiting to reclaim the island from the arrogant invaders. The illusion of a quick Allied victory vanished like mist in the wind, replaced by 6 months of bloody hell in the Solomon Islands. Having lost the beaches, the Japanese forces regrouped in the island's interior, hiding in the dense jungle like desperate ghosts, switching to treacherous guerrilla tactics, turning every bush into a deadly trappeau. Their surprise attacks sowed terror among the American soldiers, then melted back into the thick green curtain, where darkness concealed not only the enemy, but also entities beyond imagination. The chase between life and death truly began, and the old-growth forest opened the door to its darkest nightmare. Guadalcanal's treacherous terrain, sheer cliffs, gloomy valleys, vegetation like a living wall, became an unwilling ally to the Japanese, and simultaneously an invisible enemy to the US Marines. "Watch your step! Don't fall behind!" an American sergeant roared. But the echo from the deep jungle wasn't his comrade's voice, but a low, terrifying sound, like the island itself breathing up. On the smaller islands, Japanese forces were wiped out in days of fierce fighting, but Guadalcanal, the giant green monster, devoured 6 months of blood and tears before yielding. As the Allies pushed the Japanese deeper into the unexplored wilderness, where sunlight was a distant memory, horrifying rumors began to circulate among the enemy ranks. It wasn't the fear of bombs or bayonets, but of something ancient, brutal, stalking them in the darkness, waiting to unleash its fury. Trembling whispers among the Japanese soldiers gradually became clear reports. They were facing enormous, hairy creatures, the true giants of the Solomons. It was tall as a treetop, eyes burning red like fire. A surviving Japanese soldier recounted, his voice lost in terror, still clutching a blood-soaked shred of his comrade's uniform. According to what I've read in suppressed records, they stood between 8 and 15 feet tall, enough to make a human feel like an insect before themfall. Shaggy fur, black, brown, or reddish-brown, covered their bodies. Their eyes, glowing red, like embers, pierced the darkness, instilling primal fear in the hearts of the unfortunate. Unlike the rock apes, or batutut in Vietnam, ape-like creatures reportedly encountered by American soldiers, which I've also researched, the Solomon giants were more human-like in form, possessing a primitive yet deadly intelligence. They weren't just wild beasts. They carried weapons, massive stone clubs, crude but sharp spears, ready to crush or impale anyone daring to invade their territory. "Run! It's coming!" a Japanese soldier screamed in the night. But before his comrades could react, a giant figure burst out, grabbed him, and vanished into the deep jungle, leaving only the sound of splintering bone. There are reports claiming they tore victims apart on the spot, eating them raw, blood streaming onto the ground. A scene far surpassing the brutality of war. Encounters were living nightmares, stone clubs smashing heads, spears piercing chests, or giant hands squeezing until the final scream died out. They asserted their territory with roars that shook the mountains and forests, uprooting ancient trees like weeds, displaying a strength that sent chills down the spines of both Japanese and American soldiers. "I hear it. Like thunder, but closer, much closer." A US Marine whispered to his buddy, gripping his rifle tightly, eyes scanning the endless darkness. I believe these giants weren't just creatures. They were the embodiment of the island's curse, punishing trespassers by dragging them into a dismembered death. During those 6 months, Guadalcanal was not only a human battlefield, but a place where reality and myth collided. where giant beings stepped out of the darkness to reclaim their stolen land. Faced with horrifying sights, Japanese soldiers scattered, fleeing deeper into Guadalcanal's jungle, hoping to find refuge in the darkness. But they didn't know that darkness already had an owner. They lay pressed against the cold, damp earth through the long nights, holding their breath, ears straining to hear sounds that froze their blood. Heavy, thudding footsteps, the crack of breaking branches, and the hiss of something hunting them in the thick night. "Hear that? It's very close," a Japanese soldier whispered, voice trembling. But his comrade only squeezed his hand tighter, eyes glued to the darkness as if he could see through it. The night was no longer a sanctuary, but a kingdom of primal fear, where sleep, a precious commodity in war, became a distant dream for the miserable soldiers. The thunderous roars of the giants pierced the deep jungle, pounding their eardrums, making their hearts race in chests already exhausted by fear and hunger. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the roar, but the heart-wrenching screams of comrades echoing in the dead of night. Then abruptly silenced, a silence more horrifying than death itself. "Sato! Where's Sato?" A panicked soldier screamed, trying to crawl through the underbrush. But only the whistling wind and the faint, metallic tang of blood in the air answered Himi. In one classified report, a Japanese soldier recounted seeing the shadow of a comrade being dragged into the jungle, leaving only the sound of breaking bones and a sickening chewing noise echoing. As the campaign dragged on through bloody weeks, Japanese soldiers were torn between two fronts. By day, the fierce firepower of the Americans. By night, the nightmare of the giants lurking in the shadows. They lived in a constant state of crisis, eyes wide open, afraid to blink, because every closed eye was an invitation to death from the giant hands ready to tear them apart. The obsession with being eaten alive gnawed at their minds, deeper than the fear of bombs, turning once proud warriors into trembling prey before the ancient predator. If these stories are true, and as a researcher I cannot dismiss them, then there must have been soldiers who survived, carrying horrific memories from the deep jungle. Captured by the Americans as prisoners of war, the survivors looked like soulless ghosts, stammering. Giants they eat people red eyes, their words fragmented, eyes staring emptily into the void. "It wasn't human, I swear," one prisoner screamed at the American guards, but he only received a pitying shake of the head, as if the war had already stolen his sanity. The Bushido Code was deeply ingrained in the Japanese soldiers' minds. Surrender was shameful. Only victory or an honorable death was their path. But no one trained them to face giants. It was the fear of being torn apart that pushed them beyond their mental limits, forcing them to choose survival over suicide, something unprecedented in the Emperor's army. Samurai tradition didn't prepare them for the prospect of being hunted by towering creatures wielding stone clubs and crude spears, capable of crushing both honor and bone. Yet, the fact remains that many Japanese soldiers were captured as POWs, carrying the cultural burden and insane stories of an enemy not of this worldly. If these proud warriors, who viewed death as glory, trembled while recounting tales of man-eating giants, what in the deep jungle broke their iron will? The fate of these unwilling witnesses is now lost in the mists of time, forgotten like the dying screams in Guadalcanal's dark nights. 80 years have passed, and their terrifying accounts are dismissed as legends, products of minds shattered by war. But the Solomon Islanders know it wasn't imagination. I believe the truth lies beyond the bullets and bombs. Something in that jungle, giants, demons, or an ancient curse, turned the battlefield into a supernatural slaughterhouse. Was it merely a way for humans to rationalize the unexplainable, or evidence that Guadalcanal was not just a place where men fought, but a gateway to another world? Reality and myth blend in a terrifying mist. Strangely, and this is the twist that makes the story even more chilling, for the native Solomon Islanders, the giants aren't myths. They are part of the island's flesh and blood. Many islanders will look at you with sharp eyes and state firmly, those stories are true. They still live somewhere in the deep jungle. To them, the existence of the giants isn't superstition or distant legend, but a reality etched into their culture, passed down through generations like a chilling warning. Giants? Oh, yes. My grandfather used to say, they pulled trees up by the roots like pulling weeds. An old fisherman whispered, his cloudy eyes gazing out to sea, voice trembling as if reliving a horrific memory. The Solomon Islands are unlike any other place I've been there, and I felt the mystery weighing heavily in the air, a place where even time seems to stand still. To this day, this impoverished land remains shrouded in the darkness of an unwritten past, with only oral traditions echoing through generations like the wind whistling through the jungle. In 1942, much of the island's jungle interior was forbidden territory, a green labyrinth no one dared enter, not even the natives. A place where darkness swallowed all light and lifey. Those forests, with creatures hidden in the shadows, remain an unsolved puzzle even in the 21st century. Like a chilling challenge to modern science. The roots of this mystery lie with the ancestors of the Solomon Islanders, fierce tribes living in isolation, always ready for bloody warfare with neighboring enemies. They were head-hunting warriors, even practicing cannibalism, living in a state of perpetual warfare, fearing not only enemies but also the creatures lurking in the deep jungle. "Don't go into the jungle at night! They'll take your head!" A village elder would roar at the children, pointing towards the darkness, where a low growl echoed back like an assertion of ownership. For defense, they built fortified camps high in the mountains or precarious houses in ancient trees, hiding amidst treacherous terrain, avoiding both wild animals and unseen foes. The arrival of Christian missionaries in the 19th century was like a strange wind, gradually extinguishing the flames of tribal warfare, bringing peace, but also opening another terrifying door. Over decades of conversion, people abandoned their jungle strongholds, moving down to the coastal areas, building peaceful villages by the water where sunlight could reach. But this change, unintentionally, created a forgotten land, an isolated paradise for the creatures of legend, where they silently thrived over centuries. When the Solomon Islanders left the deep jungle, they didn't just leave behind their homes, they entrusted it to the giants, the true rulers of the island. The interior jungle became increasingly alien, a dark kingdom where rustling leaves weren't just the wind, but the sign of giant footsteps drawing nearer. Once I heard a hunter tell me he saw footprints 3 times larger than a man's deep in the mud, and the thick stench of death lingered. During 2 centuries of isolation, these creatures, giants, demons, or something nameless, might have grown stronger, hidden in the darkness, waiting for war to awaken them. Very few Solomon Islanders dared venture deep into the jungle, where ancient stories of horrific entities still whispered on the wind, like warnings from the dead. Through centuries of chaos, local legends survived, passed down from generation to generation around flickering fires, carrying the cold breath of primal fear. Just as Europeans told tales of wolves or bears to warn children, Solomon Islanders whispered chilling stories to their descendants. Not about wild animals, but about predators beyond imagination. They spoke of man-eating giants, ancient, towering creatures hidden in the dark jungle depths, with eyes burning red like hellfire searching for prey. Don't ask why. Just stay away from the deep jungle. An old Solomon woman snapped at the children, her trembling hand pointing towards the darkness, where a low growl rumbled like an assertion of power. I asked an islander, why giants? He looked at me, gave a faint smile. Because they're real. If you don't believe it, try going into the jungle yourself. To them, giants weren't fairy tales. They were cold, hard facts, affirmed with a disturbingly calm tone, as if discussing a familiar animal. World War II, with its fire and blood, unintentionally pulled back the mysterious veil of the Solomons before the world, illuminating entities the islanders had feared for generations. Nicholas Cox, a passionate archaeologist, was drawn into this maelstrom of mystery, setting foot on the islands to search not only for war relics, but also traces of living nightmare sky. He began his journey in 2019, after a friend told him about forgotten Japanese tunnels on Kalangara Island he'd discovered in 1995. A spark that ignited Nick's curiosity. That tunnel was cold, like someone was breathing down my neck. His friend whispered to Nick, voice distant, eyes still haunted by the memory from nearly 3 decades prior. Excited, Nick planned an expedition. But during his research, he stumbled upon horrifying accounts of Japanese soldiers confronting giants in the deep jungles of Guadalcanal. I met Nick once at a conference. He said when he read those stories, he felt a cold chill run down his spine. Not from fear, but from intuition. However, with a scientific eye, Nick quickly noticed a gap. Most stories about the giants came from non-Japanese sources, lacking direct accounts from the very soldiers who faced them. Forums, articles, and cryptozoology websites called them titans in Japanese, describing them with terrifying height and destructive power, but still lacking concrete evidence. If they were real, why did no one survive to tell the tale? Or did they tell? But no one believed them. Nick wandered in the night, the light from his oil lamp illuminating his doubtful face. The absence of personal accounts from Japanese soldiers troubled Nick. Were these stories true, or just products of imagination warped by the fog of war? Perhaps many Japanese soldiers saw the giants, but didn't survive to tell, or their accounts were buried in the shame of defeat. Half discouraged, Nick began to think it might be wartime propaganda or exaggerated myth. But deep down, a part of him still believed the truth was hiding somewhere in the jungle. The most crucial witnesses, the surviving Japanese soldiers, seemed to have vanished into the mists of time, leaving the question hanging between reality and supernatural nightmare. Are the stories of giants merely explanations for inexplicable losses in the deep jungle, or do they hide a horrific truth beyond imagination? When Nicholas Cox set foot on the Solomon Islands, his skepticism about the giants vanished like mist in the wind, replaced by astonishment mixed with profound fear. He asked the locals about these creatures, and their attitude sent a chill down his spine. They spoke of the giants with unsettling calmness, as if they were part of everyday life. Oh, the giants? Yes, of course. An old woman replied, her hands steadily weaving a net, her voice low like the ocean waves. They don't appear as often now, but they're still there, in the deep jungle, waiting. No hesitation, no hint of fantasy. To them, the giants were an obvious truth, a living ghost in their real world. What stunned Cox even more was that some locals insisted these creatures still existed, hiding in the darkest corners of the jungle where sunlight never reached. A hunter recounted seeing giant footprints in the mud so deep it was as if the earth had been crushed by an ancient ragin. However, not everyone believed this. Some thought the giants had long gone extinct, wiped out in brutal wars among themselves, before missionaries brought the light of Christianity to the islands. They whispered that the giants' ferocious nature led to their self-destruction, leaving behind silent forests, still heavy with the breath of death from centuries ago. When Cox asked about the Japanese soldiers in World War II, none of the locals remembered clearly. War memories had faded, but they all nodded. If it happened, then it was surely true. "If the giants are still alive," a village chief told Cox, his distant gaze fixed on the misty mountains, "then they are in the deep jungle, where no one dares to tread. That is their kingdom." Very few locals dared venture into the jungle interior, where fear came not only from the giants, but also from other entities, ghosts, demons, or nameless curses. "Don't go too far, you won't come back," a man warned Cox, his voice trembling, pointing towards the jungle as if seeing something move in the shadows. Cox noticed something strange. Despite being devout Christians, the islanders still carried a pride mixed with obsession about their ancestral past. The notorious head-hunting tribes. They didn't hesitate to talk about the violent bloodline running through their veins, a history full of regret, but also sparking a morbid curiosity about their forefathers' cannibalistic practices. In an old record I once read, the Solomon Islanders believed their ancestors learned cannibalism from the giants themselves, as a ritual mimicking the rulers of the deep jungle. A chilling local theory began to form. The giants weren't just predators, but the inspiration for human brutality, a dark connection stretching through time. Maybe our ancestors once worshipped them, a local whispered to Cox, eyes flashing with a mix of fear and reverence. But now they're just ghosts of the past. For Cox, each story was a piece in a horrifying puzzle, where the giants were not just creatures, but manifestations of an ancient curse, soaked in blood and darkness. The deep Solomon jungle, with its buried secrets, still stands as a silent witness, challenging all attempts at discovery and posing the question, have the giants truly vanished, or are they just waiting in the shadows? Did violence really spread from the giants to humans, or was it just an excuse to cover up a dark past? The question hangs heavy in the humid, suffocating air of the Solomon jungle. In conversations with locals, Nicholas Cox discovered that not every island in the archipelago bore traces of the giants. Some places seemed free of their shadowy. But one name was always mentioned with a mixture of awe and trembling fear. Malaita. The island whispered to be the kingdom of the terrifying giant creatures. They said Malaita not only had giants, but was where they gathered most densely, hiding in the deep jungle and dark caves like an immortal army of shadows. Then the story took a more chilling turn when a man named Ishmael stepped forward from the crowd, his eyes blazing, declaring something that made Cox's blood run cold. He was a descendant of the giants. "My ancestor was a great warrior," Ishmael said, his deep voice full of pride yet laced with darkness. "He didn't just live in the jungle, he ruled an entire kingdom underground." Ishmael claimed that in his family line, a renowned giant had fought alongside headhunting tribes during colonial times, leaving a terrifying mark on Malaita Island. I've heard a Solomon legend that these warriors weren't just tall. They carried the stench of blood and a roar that shook the mountains and forests. Unlike other giants hiding in the jungle, Ishmael's ancestor lived in underground caves, a secret world where darkness swallowed all light and sound. The idea of an underground kingdom opened a horrific possibility. Could there be a parallel world where giants moved like undetectable ghosts? Some locals even believed the islands, though separated by miles of ocean, were connected by a network of deep caves, the secret paths of the ancient predators. I saw a cave. Once, Ishmael whispered to Cox, his gaze distant. It was so deep I could hear breathing from below. Not human. Although Ishmael's story is hard to verify, I know the belief in mythical creatures living in caves is not uncommon. From the Andes to Central Asia, such legends persist. Could it be related to the hollow earth theory, where an underworld hides entities beyond comprehension? That's a question that sends chills down both Cox's spine and my own when I consider it. In the Solomon community, it's believed that giants aren't entirely a separate species, but an evolutionary branch from humans, a deviant, terrifying lineage, yet still bearing human traces. I've researched hybrid creatures, not quite human, not quite beast, and the Solomon giants seem to be evidence of a forgotten past. The name Solomon Islands derives from King Solomon in the Bible, a detail that leads local Christians to associate the giants with the Nephilim, offspring of fallen angels and humans. They are children of the devil, a local pastor whispered to Cox, clutching his cross tightly. Their sins transformed them into flesh-eaters, cursed forever in the darkness. If the Nephilim were indeed the origin, then the giants aren't just creatures. They are the embodiment of an ancient curse, a horrific legacy from humanity's primordial times. Malaita, with its caves and deep jungles, stands as a silent witness, challenging Cox and anyone daring to seek the truth about these rulers of darkness. The Solomon Islanders believe the giants are not just creatures, but also carry intermingled human blood, a terrifying possibility that blurs the definition of humanity. Chilling stories spread across the islands, recounting encounters between humans and giants, events that shook beliefs and brought unspeakable fear. On Guadalcanal, the name Mango became a haunting legend. A young woman who disappeared in 1950 when the smoke of World War II still lingered over the ravaged island. Mango vanished from her village without a trace, as if swallowed by darkness, causing the villagers to gradually abandon hope, believing she was taken by wild beasts or the deep jungle. But 25 years later, on a fateful day, Mango returned, not as dry bones, but as a living woman, with wild eyes and a mind shattered like broken glass. She was found in a coastal garden northeast of Guadalcanal, screaming nonsense, foaming at the mouth, her belly heavily pregnant like a curse-made manifesto. "Stay away from me! It will find me! It will kill you all!" Mango shrieked, struggling frantically in the arms of the men trying to save her, like a trapped wild animal. I immediately looked up reports on this case. She wasn't just panicked. She carried the stench of the deep jungle as if the darkness had seeped into her very fleshy. Despite care, Mango never returned to her former self. She lived like a shadow, mentally unstable, only lucid in rare moments to recount her nightmare. Through fragmented memories, she revealed a horrific truth. She was abducted by a giant, held captive in its domain, a place untouched by human light. The creature had raped her, made her its wife, and the child in her womb was the result of a dark union between human and monster beyond imagination. It was huge, eyes burning red. I couldn't escape. Mango whispered during a brief moment of clarity, clutching her belly, tears streaming down her weathered face. Later, Mango gave birth to a baby boy, a hybrid child carrying the blood of both human and giant, with deep eyes that seemed to hold secrets from another realm. The boy survived until age 5, growing up silently in the village, but his existence hung like a curse, making villagers view him with a mixture of fear and superstition. Then tragedy struck. The boy's uncle, Mango's brother, allegedly murdered his hybrid nephew, possibly out of fear of something not belonging to this world. Suspicion arose that the boy's death wasn't just superstition. Perhaps they feared he would bring the giants back to the village, like a summons from the darkness. Some locals know where the boy was buried. An unmarked grave deep in the jungle, holding the secret of the horrific interspecies crossing eye. More terrifyingly, Mango wasn't the only case. Whispers told of other women taken by giants, leaving behind stories buried in Painor. I heard another one returned, but she couldn't speak anymore, just sat staring into the jungle as if waiting for something. A local told Cox, his voice trembling. Mango's story spread, gaining international attention when recorded in the book Solomon Islands Mysteries. Accounts of giants and UFOs in the Solomon Islands. A book that resurrected forgotten horrors. I've read that book. It not only tells of giants, but suggests Guadalcanal is where reality and the supernatural collide, leaving indelible scars. Was Mango truly the victim of an ancient creature? Or was her story just the villagers' way of explaining incomprehensible losses in the dark jungle? Imagine an old book, cover tattered, but inside are terrifying stories that would make even seasoned soldiers shudder. That book, written by Marius Boron, ripped open the island's veil of mystery, revealing beliefs and experiences the civilized world dared not believe were real. Marius Boron was no ordinary man. He was once an aircraft engineer in the Royal Australian Air Force, facing cold steel machines. But when he set foot in the Solomons in 1995, he discovered something more frightening than war. Supernatural stories from the islanders themselves. So haunting. He couldn't stop documenting them. His military experience honed a sharp intuition. When he heard old soldiers talk about giant shadows lurking in the battlefield mist, Boron didn't scoff. He started digging deeper. He believed war wasn't just about bombs and bullets, but a time when supernatural entities emerged, exploiting the chaos to sow terror. In his book, Boron tells of Mango, a Guadalcanal woman abducted by a giant in the night. But that wasn't all. He recorded 2 similar incidents, where desperate screams echoed, then died out in the deep jungle. This wasn't coincidence. It was a horrific pattern repeating itself, as if the island was cursed by an ancient force. These stories weren't just idle tales. Boron traveled extensively across the islands, listening to oral histories from village elders whose distant eyes seemed to see through time. They spoke of their ancestors, brave warriors forced to take up spears and stones, engaging in life or death battles with bloodthirsty giants. When night fell, as the wind howled through the leaves, the giants appeared. They weren't just tall as trees. They carried the thick stench of death. They tore apart tents, crushed human bones like dry twigs. A Japanese soldier once wrote in his diary, hand trembling as he recalled watching comrades eaten alive. These monsters knew no fear. They raided villages, sometimes to hunt, sometimes merely to satisfy their savage nature. Villagers told of a time a giant stood in the square, holding a child high, laughing loudly before tearing the victim apart before the eyes of helplessly screaming mothers. The chiefs didn't sit idle. They gathered the best hunters, armed with sharp spears and ancient charms, determined to hunt down the monsters. But every expedition was a nightmare. We heard heavy footsteps, then the sound of breaking bones. A surviving warrior whispered to Boron, eyes vacant as if his soul had been sucked out. Few from those hunting parties returned intact. 10 went out. 3 came back, a descendant recounted, voice choked with emotion. The survivors no longer laughed or spoke. They just sat there, staring into space, as if they'd seen something they shouldn't have. It wasn't just fear. It was a curse that haunted them for life. From these terrifying fragments, Boron concluded, the giants viewed the Solomon Islanders as livestock. For over 5,000 years, they hunted, slaughtered, turning humans into meals. The island's population thus remained small, never flourishing, as if held back by an invisible hand from Hele. But then, why did these monsters disappear? Boron proposed a theory that sends chills down my spine too. He spoke of a war between giant tribes, where blood flowed like rivers and bones piled like mountains, weakening their species. Then came firearms. When the islanders learned to pull the trigger, the explosions sounded like a declaration of war against the darkness. We shot, and for the first time, they ran. An old hunter told Boron, a smile mixed with terror on his lips. But were guns enough to drive away creatures born of nightmares? And the final, strangest element, which makes even me skeptical. Boron believed extraterrestrials intervened. Were the mysterious lights in the Solomon skies not just stars, but signs of a cosmic power arriving to end the nightmare? That question hangs in the air, like the wind whistling through deserted villages. Continuing these thrilling stories, I will lead you into the world of Marius Boron, where truth and nightmare intertwine, where the Solomon Islands are not just land, but a realm teeming with darkness and whispers from the dead. Boron's book isn't something you read for relaxation. It's a doorway to hell, where tales of giants, UFOs, and ancient curses make even me, someone who has studied demons and monsters, shudder. Believe it or not, you won't be able to look away from those blood-soaked pagazzi. The work quickly caught the attention of scholars, including Nicholas Cox, a renowned archaeologist I met during my own research journey. Cox, with his sharp eyes and steady, deep voice, was drawn into Boron's narrative while excavating the past on this very island. In a 2021 interview on the podcast Into the Portal, Cox sat facing the microphone, holding Boron's worn book. "It's fascinating, but also dangerous," he said, his voice cautious. "I study military history and cryptozoology, but Boron seems to be dancing on the line between truth and wild dreams." Skeptics didn't miss the chance to attack. They called the book supernatural garbage, criticizing Boron for digressions into conspiracy theories, from underground UFO bases to the secret hand of global governments. Personally, I think he might have gone too far. But that audacity adds to the story's haunting quality. Cox didn't hesitate to voice his opinion. Boron tries to cram everything in. He sighed on the podcast. Giants, UFOs, conspiracies, all mixed into a chaotic mess. It overshadows the valuable first-hand accounts he painstakingly collected. Yet, the strangeness of the Solomons still clung to his mind like a curse. The Solomon Islands are no stranger to mysteries in the sky. Boron recounted that in the darkness of war, American sailors thought they were facing advanced Japanese weapons when dozens of glowing orbs flew in a diamond formation overhead. "What is that, Commander?" a panicked sailor yelled, but only the cold, whistling wind answered. Initially, alarms blared, guns ready to fire. But the objects silently vanished into nothingness, no explosion, no trace. Like a dream wiped clean. Was it a sign of something beyond human comprehension, or just hallucinations amidst the fog of war? Then the story shifts to a specific location. The Gold Ridge mine on Guadalcanal Boron, during his years on the island, heard an account that chilled his blood. It wasn't just about gold, but a place where heaven and earth met darkness, where humans accidentally awoke something that should have remained undisturbed. Gold Ridge wasn't an ordinary gold mine. For 30 years, it was caught in a cycle of starting and closing, as if cursed by the land itself. Islanders whispered that beneath the glittering gold veins lay the lairs of monsters, and the sound of machinery only angered them further. In the mid-90s, after tense negotiations, the mining company finally got the green light. They brought massive machinery, carving through the deep jungle, the roar of engines drowning out the wind. It was this intrusion that summoned something from the shadows below. Work began with great enthusiasm. Giant bulldozer blades tore through earth and rock, dust clouding the green jungle. But then, in a fateful moment, a bulldozer suddenly stopped, as if held fast by an invisible hand. "The engine's dead!" the driver yelled, his voice cracking with fear. When they inspected it, the multi-ton blade had been ripped clean off the machine. A massive retaining pin, the toughest metal humans could forge, was snapped in two like a dry twig. No one could explain it. Impact? Pressure? It was a warning from whatever lurked beneath the ground. Something Boron had spoken of with horrified Icy. That bulldozer blade weighed as much as a tank, a cold steel mass lying in the deep jungle. It wasn't something any person or any normal thing could lift. But that night, as darkness fell over Guadalcanal, a mysterious force made it a pawn in its own terrifying game. The work crew had no way to lift the blade out of the thick mud. They removed all the pins, detaching it from the dozer, sweating profusely under the blazing red sunset. "We'll come back tomorrow to reattach it," the foreman muttered, unaware it was the last time he'd see it intact in that spotter. As night descended, the crew left, leaving the blade alone in the mire. The chirping of insects blended with the cold wind, as if the forest was whispering something menacing. At that very moment, something stalked from the shadows, waiting for its chancey. Dawn arrived. The crew returned, but the scene before them left them frozen. The multi-ton blade had vanished without a trace. Impossible. "It was right here!" the foreman screamed, pointing at the muddy empty space, eyes wild as if he'd just seen a ghostie. But the horror didn't stop there. In the damp mud, enormous footprints appeared, nearly 3 feet long, pressed deep as if stamped down by a power not of this world. No animal on the island could leave such tracks. After the initial panic, they split up to search. Finally, the blade was found, 100 yards away, lying haphazardly on a hillside. "Who could do this?" a worker whispered, voice trembling. The giant footprints stopped near where the blade lay, as if the thing had tossed it aside and then vanished into thin air. The crew realized with trembling fear they were not alone in this jungle. Something with colossal feet and terrifying strength had claimed dominion over the violated land. This story echoes the accounts of Japanese soldiers in World War II. They too had encountered giants in the deep jungle, where darkness wasn't just night, but the glowing eyes of a monster. Had the intrusion of machinery awakened them, just as gunfire had decades before? Islanders always avoided the jungle at night, an unwritten law etched in their bones. Don't stay after sunset, the elders warned, their voices deep like echoes from the grave. But the Japanese soldiers had no choice, trapped in the darkness where bloody encounters became legend. Were the giants defending their territory? The roar of the bulldozer, the falling trees, the human presence, all like challenges to them. Perhaps they attacked not just to survive, but to roar. This is our land. Archaeologist Nicholas Cox, who had set foot in the Solomons, offered a different perspective. He spoke of the Kakamora, hairy, Bigfoot or yowie-like creatures hiding in the dense jungle. They're smaller than the giants, but no less fearsome, he said in one conversation, his eyes full of doubt. The Kakamora are described by locals with piercing eyes and a hiss like the cold wind. If they truly exist, perhaps they are relatives of the giants, sharing this island like sleepless ghosts, waiting for prey, lost in the dark night. Today, we step into the world of the Kakamora, hairy, foul-smelling figures with claws sharp as razors, stalking the Solomon Islands like an unending nightmare. The Kakamora aren't just mysterious creatures. They are living terror. Their strong, musky odor drifts on the wind. Thick fur covers their gaunt bodies, and sharp claws are ready to tear apart anyone who dares approach. Just catching that scent tells you death is nearer. Islanders tremble as they recount their cannibalistic nature. Kakamora are very dangerous, an elderly man whispered to Cox, eyes darting nervously as if afraid they might hear. They come at dusk, steal fruit, chickens, and sometimes even children. The cries of children silenced in the deep jungle still haunt them to the bone. When the sun sets, the Kakamora rise from the darkness. They sneak into villages, hairy hands fumbling in fruit gardens, piercing eyes searching for prey. Some say they heard a child's piercing scream, then silence. Only the cold wind whistling through the leaves remained. These creatures hide in the island's interior, where humans rarely tread. They climb towering trees or dwell in deep caves, much like the giants were described. Could the darkness of the jungle be a portal connecting two worlds, reality and hell? Though intelligent, Kakamora don't know how to make fire, but they are cunning enough to steal it from humans. Flickering fires in the jungle night, sending up plumes of smoke, are signs they are lurking. They learn from us, an old hunter recounted, voice trembling, and that makes them scarier. The Kakamora's voice is unlike anything on Earth. It's a clicking, giggling sound, like ghostly laughter echoing through the dense forest. Some say they heard them sing, a strange, dissonant melody that makes your hair stand on end and your heart stop for a moment. The presence of both Kakamora and giants on the same small island turns the Solomons into a supernatural labyrinth. Two species, both hairy, both bloodthirsty, stalking together in the darkness. It sends chills down even my spine thinking about the unsolved mysteries. Nicholas Cox, with a scientist's curiosity, delved into the past. He unearthed old documents from the early 20th century, written by German anthropologists. Within those yellowed pages, he found descriptions of the Kakamora, so cold and factual they made him shudder. Those anthropologists didn't view Kakamora as myth. They described them as they would a wild animal. Diet, habits, lifestyle. Without a hint of doubt, they wrote as if discussing monkeys or orangutans, Cox recounted, voice filled with amazement. No exaggeration whatsoever. This discovery led Cox to a major question. Were Kakamora real creatures, once documented by science, then buried by time into legend. Perhaps they once crossed the line between reality and the supernatural, leaving footprints in history before fading into darkness. But Cox didn't stop there. He argued that on a small island like the Solomons, two species like the giants and Kakamora could hardly coexist. They would fight to the death, he stated in a debate, tapping his fingers on the table. The law of survival wouldn't allow both to dominate. Therefore, Cox proposed a bold hypothesis. The Kakamora, standing only about 4 to 5 feet tall, might actually be the giants of the stories had humans exaggerated their fear, turning a small but fierce creature into a colossal monster in their panic. It's also possible. Could the Kakamora be just smaller versions of the giants? Or is it all just exaggerated whispers born from human nightmares on the Solomon Islands? Nicholas Cox faced a perplexing question. He wondered if a 4-foot Kakamora could grow into the rumored 15-foot monster. The idea was both intriguing and terrifying, like a seed of horror sprouting in the mind, even if biology might scoff at the absurdity. Cox leaned towards skepticism. He believed the stories of giants were like fishermen's tales. The fish got bigger with each retelling. It was tall as a building, claws a yard long. A survivor might scream, eyes wild, but Cox believed fear had inflated truth into a nightmare. Each time the story was retold, the giant grew taller. Fiercer men, trembling before them, needed to explain their terror, so the creature in their memory ballooned. Far beyond reality, fear distorts even the sharpest memories. Cox argued coldly. A truly giant creature couldn't hide forever. With that size, they'd need vast amounts of food, large territories. Small islands like the Solomons couldn't conceal them from modern eyes. If they existed, we'd have found bones, he said, his voice firm as nails. Instead, Cox proposed a more plausible possibility. He thought the giants might just be mature Kakamora, standing around 6 to 7 feet tall. In the dark jungle, under the terrified gaze of islanders, they could easily become the monsters of legend. The Solomon Islanders, averaging only 5 feet 4 inches tall, would surely tremble before a hairy creature over 65 feet tall. It stood there, red eyes burning right through me, a hunter once told Cox, his voice distant. I can feel that fear. It doesn't need exaggeration to be haunting. Cox's hypothesis sounds reasonable, but still leaves terrifying gaps. How to explain the extraordinary strength? Like throwing a multi-ton bulldozer blade over a hill. What were the crude weapons in their hands? The mystery still hangs, like the wind whistling through the dark caves on the island. When it came to World War II, Marius Boron stepped in with a bold perspective. He believed the giants, or some other creature, fought against the Japanese on Guadalcanal. Were giant figures truly hidden in the fog of war, or just the delirium of soldiers? Boron acknowledged a strange fact that baffled the US military after landing. Something on the island had disrupted their plans, an unsolved mystery. There's something out there, a US soldier once whispered to his comrade, gripping his rifle, eyes fixed on the pitch-black jungle. On Guadalcanal Island, where Japanese forces were routed not by bullets, but by terrifying powers hidden in the darkness. Historians still argue over a chilling question. Why did the Japanese, with months to prepare, lose Guadalcanal so easily? They had time. They had plans to build an airfield. But when the Americans arrived, the island was as silent as an abandoned tomb. What happened in the deep jungle? On August 7th, US Marines landed on Red Beach, hearts pounding, ready for a bloody battle. "We thought we'd all die," one veteran recounted, his voice raspy, But there was nothing, just the waves and a deathly silence. It felt wrong, terribly wrong. The landing was smooth, not a single shot fired. They advanced inland, capturing Lunga, Point Airfield, later Henderson Field, without any resistance. That quiet wasn't victory. It was a warning from something lurking. The Japanese military was renowned for its iron will, ready to fight to the last man. So why did they vanish from such a crucial strategic position? No gunfire, no screams, only the silent jungle holding a horrific secret humans dared not touch. Mainstream historians offer a simple answer. The Japanese grew complacent after a string of victories in Asia, never expecting the Americans to target Guadalcanal. They were surprised, their forces small, only a few hundred soldiers initially, instead of the thousands the US expected. Logical, but not enough to dispel the darkness. Later, tens of thousands of Japanese reinforcements were brought in by the Navy, but it was too late. The Americans held the island. This explanation relies on strategy and intelligence, dry and rational. But I still feel something larger, darker, hidden behind those numbers. Marius Boron entered with a wild theory. Tearing up the history books, he asserted the Japanese didn't flee due to tactics, but because they had become prey for the giants, and something even more terrifying. Half-human, half-lizard warriors lurking in the deep jungle like living nightmares. Boron wrote with chilling certainty. Some Japanese soldiers became free meals for the giants. Then they encountered the lizard creatures. And when news reached headquarters, they decided, abandon the island, let them have it. Could this be the truth buried beneath the smoke of war? According to Boron, these two supernatural forces, colossal giants and swift demonic lizard warriors, inflicted extreme terror upon the Japanese troops. We saw them in the dark. A Japanese soldier might have whispered before dying, glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. They weren't retreating. They were fleeing for their lives. Marius Boron's wild theory proposed. Japanese troops on Guadalcanal weren't just fleeing giants, but were also being torn apart by half-human, half-lizard warriors hiding in the dark jungle depths. According to Boron, this dual assault from two demonic forces chilled the Japanese high command to the bone. They didn't retreat for strategic reasons, but because the island had become a living hell. But if Boron was right, if the Japanese truly faced giants and lizardmen before being pushed into the jungle, a chilling question arises. Why did they still send reinforcements? Thousands of soldiers were poured in, as if throwing them into the monster's maw. The Japanese Navy persistently pumped troops into Guadalcanal, despite all dangers. This action flatly contradicts Boron's hypothesis. If they had abandoned the island out of fear, why continue fighting? Perhaps supernatural terror wasn't enough to overcome their military pride. It's this contradiction that allowed skeptics to tear Boron's theory apart. Completely illogical, they shouted, criticizing him for leaps from reality into delirium. The giant footprints, the soldiers' accounts, all overshadowed by the sudden appearance of lizard men. But Boron didn't stop. He pushed the story deeper into darkness, claiming that beneath the Solomon soil lay the dens of a reptilian race, creatures with hard scales, glowing eyes, coexisting with giants in a terrifying underworld. Could this island be a gateway to hell? The idea of an underground supernatural ecosystem sounds like science fiction. But Boron was convinced. He envisioned dark caves where giants and lizardmen lurked, perhaps even communicating with eerie hisses, awaiting prey from the world above. reptilian humanoids aren't new. Around the world, from folklore to military reports, they appear like ghosts. I recall whispers from US soldiers in Vietnam. We saw devil creatures, scales glinting under the moon, fast as nightmares. This coincidence is chilling. Boron recounted visiting the Japanese War Memorial on Guadalcanal. Amidst the peaceful garden, he saw a bronze statue, not of an ordinary human, but a bizarre creature. It had scales, holding a ray gun attached to its tail, he wrote, his tone certain as if he'd found the key to the mystery. That description paints a picture of a high-tech reptilian warrior, like something from a futuristic nightmare. Boron believed this was living proof of his theory, hidden right at a memorial site. This land seems to be where reality and myth collide, where the impossible becomes possible. All these things, giants, Kakamora, UFOs, lizard men, make the Solomon Islands sound like they stepped out of a classic King Kong movie, a forgotten world where primordial creatures still exist. And in fact, perhaps it's no coincidence that the national slogan, or tourism logo, of the Solomon Islands is "The Land That Time Forgot." This is a title that has been used for numerous books and films depicting the common theme of prehistoric creatures surviving on an isolated island. Is it mere coincidence, or a tacit acknowledgement of their own mysteries? But even if we temporarily set aside the supernatural elements and assume that all the stories of giants living on the island are purely myth and folklore, a fundamental question remains. Where did they originate? Every myth has some kernel of truth, however small. So what is that kernel here? Hayasan. One possibility worth considering comes from a seemingly unrelated source. An article in the Pacific Islands Monthly magazine from 1970. The article was titled, "Kakamura Goes Home." It was actually an obituary, commemorating a respected doctor who had spent most of his adult life living with and serving the Melanesian people on the island of Makirai. This doctor was Dr. Charles Fox, a figure we will mention again. He had moved to Makira Island as a mission school teacher in 1903, a time when many islands were still shrouded in the darkness of ancient customs. The article notes interestingly that Makira was one of the islands infamous for cannibalism in ancient times. During his time on the island, Dr. Fox was adopted by the Arosi tribe and even exchanged names with a young chief. Through this, he received the nickname Kakamura. This is highly significant, as it suggests the young chief might have been named after the strange, hairy creatures said to live on the island, the Kakamora themselves. "Call him Kakamora," the chief said, a mysterious smile on his lips. "He is as swift and unpredictable as they are." The article goes on to state that in 1933, Dr. Fox moved to live on the island of Malaitai. And here is a crucial detail. The article describes Malaita in 1933 as, quote, "an island feared for the hostility of its people." Remember, this was 1933, less than a decade before World War II erupted in the Pacific, and the people of Malaita were still considered hostile and dangerous. And Malaita is also the very island that locals today still say is overrun with giants, and where the man named Ishmael claimed descent from a giant warrior Shah. What does this coincidence mean? Is there a deeper connection between the hostility of the Malatan people and the legend of the giants than we might think? The 1977 article even points out that Dr. Charles Fox, the respected doctor nicknamed Kakamura, was himself one of the brave coast watchers during World War II. He secretly provided crucial intelligence, aiding the Allied invasion to clear the Japanese from the islands. But listen carefully to this detail, a direct quote from the article, revealing an astonishing truth. The Japanese were always trying to capture him, but he was always warned in time of their approach and was able to escape into the deep interior, where the Japanese were afraid to follow because of the hostility of the natives. They feared the Bushmen more than our bullets, an Australian intelligence officer noted in his report after interviewing Fox. Those people didn't fight by any rules. Read that sentence again carefully. The Japanese didn't dare go deep into the interior of Malaita, not because of treacherous terrain or fear of getting lost, but because of the hostility of the natives. This paints a completely different picture than the image of gentle, devout, coastal-dwelling islanders we often imagine after the Christianization process. The Solomon Islands, where reality and nightmare merge, where the deep jungle hides not only trees, but also terrifying creatures from a forgotten time. Giants, Kakamora, UFOs, lizard men, all make the Solomons seem like the set of a King Kong movie, an island left behind by time. The slogan, "The land that time forgot," isn't just tourism marketing. It's a tacit admission of chilling mysteries no one dares touch. Even setting aside the supernatural, viewing it all as myth, the haunting question remains: where did these legends originate? Every story holds a tiny grain of truth, and that kernel lies deep in the dark history of the Solomons, waiting to be unearthed. A surprising clue emerges from the 1977 article in Pacific Islands Monthly. The title "Kakamura Goes Home" tells of Dr. Charles Fox, a doctor living among the Melanesians on Makira Island. He wasn't just a healer, but a bridge to the island's horrific mysteries. Fox arrived in Makira in 1903, when the shadow of cannibalism still loomed. The Arosi tribe adopted him, nicknaming him Kakamura, a name evoking the hairy, swift-as-demons creatures of the deep jungle. He's like them. The chief smiled mysteriously, elusive and full of secrets. In 1933, Fox moved to Malaita, an island described as feared for the hostility of its people. Just years before Wbutseku, Malaita remained a wild land, where natives greeted strangers not with smiles, but with blades and cold stares. Malaita is also where people today whisper about giants. A man named Ishmael once declared, "I am descended from a giant warrior," his eyes burning. Could the hostility of the Malaitans be a remnant of an ancient, fiercer race than humans? Dr. Fox wasn't just a doctor. During Wu, he became a coast watcher, silently sending intelligence to the Allies. The Japanese hunted him, but he always escaped. They got close, but I vanished, he recounted, a faint smile hiding secrets from the deep jungle. The article reveals a chilling detail. The Japanese dared not pursue Fox into Malaita's interior, not because of the terrain, but due to the hostility of the natives. They feared the Bushmen more than bullets, an Australian officer recorded, his voice trembling as he heard Fox describe shadows lurking in the darkness. The image of gentle islanders shatters Malaita in 1933 was a land of fear, where natives fought without rules. That hostility wasn't just resistance. It was a trace of a supernatural power that made even the Japanese tremble. Malaita Island during World War II, where Japanese soldiers feared not only bullets, but also trembled before terrifying figures hidden deep within the jungle. On Malaita, the inland inhabitants didn't welcome strangers with smiles. They were hostile tribes living deep in the jungle, carrying wild instincts. The Japanese, however brave, felt chills, hearing footsteps and roars echoing from the darkness. A new, more realistic theory emerges. Perhaps it wasn't giants, but the fierce tribal warriors themselves who were the nightmare for the Japanese. They cut off heads, ate their enemies, a Japanese soldier might have whispered before disappearing into the jungle. In the fog of war, fear exaggerates everything. Native warriors, with sharp blades and bloody rituals, could easily be transformed into giant monsters in the panicked minds of defeated soldiers. Paranoia painted giants from real blood and bone. But Nicholas Cox suggests the Japanese might have faced both. Hostile tribes and the Kakamora. Hairy creatures, swift as demons, that terrifying combination would be enough to break anyone's will, even hardened samurai. If the Kakamora truly existed, as old anthropological records suggest, then the Japanese were attacked from two sides. Something lunged from the bushes. A Japanese soldier might have screamed, hand trembling on the trigger, unsure if the enemy was human or monster. The confusion merged everything into a single nightmare. The giant legend might be the product of this horrific mix Kakamora growling in the dark, tribal warriors stalking with daggers, two fears blending, creating the image of tall, man-eating monsters, causing the Japanese to flee in desperation. The link between Kakamora and Dr. Charles Fox is illuminated in the 2008 book, Images of the Wild Man in Southeast Asia. Gregory Forth, an anthropology professor, delved into legends of wild men. Hairy creatures haunting Southeast Asian folklore, including the Solomons. Forth corroborated Cox's findings, emphasizing Malaita as the epicenter of these strange tales. Dr. Fox, who lived there, wasn't just a doctor. He was a living witness, bearing the nickname Kakamura like a thread connecting humans and mythical creatures. Fox's nickname, Kakamura, wasn't random. He was named by the tribe linked to the swift, mysterious beings of the deep jungle. "He is one of us," the Orosi chief once said, eyes twinkling as if seeing the island's secrets. I sense Fox may have known more than he ever told. So what is the chilling connection between Dr. Charles Fox, the Kakamora, and the hostile tribes of the Solomon Islands, where the origin of the giant legend slowly emerges from the darkness? Dr. Fox didn't just carry the nickname Kakamura as an honorific. He immersed himself in studying these hairy creatures, documenting every detail from native accounts. Naturally, he wasn't just a doctor. He was a truth seeker in the deep jungle, where monster roars mingled with the windy. Fox's notes, cited by Professor Forth, are chilling to the core. The Kakamora emerge with thick fur, razor-sharp claws, eyes gleaming in the night. They weren't just shadows, they were living terror, stalking around peaceful villages. Kakamora behavior is terrifying. They stole food, snatched fire from humans like brazen predators. I saw them dragging fire away, an elder told Fox, voice trembling, as if they wanted to challenge us. That confrontation wasn't just instinct, it was cold contempt. Their voices were a nightmare. Fox described them as clicking, giggling sounds, echoing through the deep jungle, making hair stand on end. I imagine hearing that sound in the dead of night. You wouldn't know if you faced a creature or a demon from Hele. But the most horrifying aspect was the Kakamora's weapons Fox recorded. They used spears and nets, not just for hunting animals, but for capturing humans. They dragged a child away, quick as lightning, a villager whispered, eyes vacant. This wasn't mere predation. It was hunting humans for sport. Their diet was a cold-blooded warning. Nuts, fruits, fish, and human flesh. "They see us as food," Fox wrote, his handwriting stiff as if unwilling to believe it. He stressed it didn't happen often, but enough to sow perpetual fear in the islanders' hearts. Forth reinforced Fox's research with centuries of documents and interviews. Belief in Kakamora wasn't limited to Malaita or Makira. It spread throughout the Solomons like an ancient curse. Fox also detected fluctuations in Kakamora populations. He linked their decline to firearms from 1860, weapons that made humans more formidable predators. But when the British authorities confiscated guns in the early 20th century, the shadow of the Kakamora rose again, like demons from a deep slumber. In The Threshold of the Pacific, 1924, Fox recorded, "Just 23 months after the gun confiscation order, people began seeing Kakamora return. As if they knew we were weaker," he wrote, his tone full of doubt. "I know you'll think like me that such intelligence isn't animalistic. It's closer to demonics." Fox didn't hastily dismiss Kakamora as myth. With independent accounts from various places, he believed they could be hiding in the Solomon jungles. "They are there. I can feel it," he once told a friend, his gaze distant, looking into infinite darkness. Islanders in the 1920s even dreamed of capturing Kakamora. They believed the government would pay $20, a fortune back then. "For each specimen, I'll kill one with my bare hands," a hunter boasted, but his eyes betrayed unconcealed fear. Fox also proposed a bold hypothesis. Kakamora might be remnants of an ancient human race, surviving in isolation in the jungle. If true, they weren't just beasts, but ghosts of ancestors, carrying prehistoric ferocity. Nicholas Cox agreed that Kakamora and giants were unlikely the same. Kakamora are small, often seen, while giants are tall, rarely encountered. The difference is too stark. Perhaps the Japanese exaggerated Kakamora into giant monsters during the panic of war. Therefore, the origin of the giant legend might be this. Kakamora, combined with the hostility of the Malaitans, inflicted terror on the Japanese forces. "There's something in the jungle," a Japanese soldier might have whispered before death, unsure if the enemy was human or demony. Thank you for following this journey. May peace be with you, whatever darkness may be lurking. See you in the next episode, where we will continue to uncover mysteries from the fog of war.